The first thing on the calendar or the agenda is the reading of the meeting minutes of October 20th, 2015. Does any commissioner have any changes, modifications, corrections to the minutes of October 20th?
Move we adopt the minutes of October 20th, 2015 as presented.
Motion has been seconded, and is there any discussion on the motion to approve the minutes? Hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions?
One abstention.
One abstention, Commissioner Gray, who was in training that day.
Yes.
And so the motion does pass with a majority vote. The consent agenda. There are 3 items on the consent agenda. Any commissioner have any desire to have one or more taken off the consent agenda? If not, maybe someone would be kind enough to make a motion to approve the consent agenda.
I move we adopt consent agenda.
Second.
Any discussion with respect to the motion to approve the consent agenda? Hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? And the motion passes unanimously. First item on the regular agenda is in the matter of the corrective action order issued to Icona Summer Chase Apartments, LP. And if Mr. Icona is present, would you kindly come to the table, sir? And with whoever you're with. Welcome, Mr. Icona. Have a seat. And I'm hoping I'm pronouncing your name correctly.
Perfect, actually.
You're represented by counsel?
No.
You want to identify the people that join you at the table, please?
My name is Paul Chandler. I'm with Sovereign Property Management. We manage the apartment complex that is being discussed here today.
Welcome.
Daniel McBride. I'm also with Sovereign Property Management. I'm the compliance officer for the company.
Welcome.
My name is Mark Parada. I'm with Daisy Construction Company.
Welcome, sir. And we're going to have, I think, Ms. Mayrack
That's correct.
kick this off. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Commissioners, you have before you in this docket proposed corrective action order number 8813. You also have a memorandum which was prepared by Jerry Platt with respect to this matter. For the purpose of building an evidentiary record, I would actually like to call Mr. Platt to testify and have him sworn in at this time.
Please raise your right hand. Do you swear that the testimony you're about to give should be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Mr. Platt, could you please state your name and occupation for the record?
My name is Gerald Platt. I am an engineer with the Public Service Commission.
And how long have you worked at the Public Service Commission?
About 5.5 years now.
And what are your responsibilities at the PSC?
My main responsibility is the Pipeline Safety Program Manager. We carry out the Pipeline Safety Program, which includes inspections throughout the year of all the pipeline systems in the state and making sure that we're in compliance with all the pipeline operators are in compliance with all the federal regulations and state regulations.
And how and when did you first become aware of the issue at the Village of Canterbury apartment complex?
We conduct routine annual inspections of all the operators, and our inspector had been on an inspection of the Village of Canterbury a couple of weeks ago. And on Thursday of this past week, the inspector brought to me this leak survey report that's attached to the memo and said, I think there's an issue here. Would you mind taking a look at it? And that's when I became aware of the situation.
And the leak survey report, which is attached to your memo and I believe in front of the commissioners and in the record for this proceeding, who prepared that memo?
The letterhead indicates it was prepared by Construction Unlimited, which was a subcontractor to Bolton Propane, who supplies the propane for the village of Canterbury, is my understanding. And I believe Bolton Propane is also under contract to take care of meeting some of the pipeline safety requirements.
Okay, so just to be clear, the party at issue in this action is Iacona Summer Chase Apartments Limited Partnership. Is that correct?
That's correct. As far as I know, they are the owners of the village of Canterbury. They have contracted with Daisy Construction to administer some duties on the property, and Daisy Construction in turn, or maybe Iacona, I'm not sure which one, has contracted with Bolton Propane to supply the propane and take care of some pipeline safety issues. And then subsequently for the leak survey, Bolton Propane apparently did not have the capability of carrying out the leak survey, so they contracted with Construction Unlimited.
And then how did the leak survey come to the commission staff?
When my inspector was doing his inspection, as part of obtaining all the necessary records and documents, he was handed a flash drive by someone at the site, and I believe after speaking with him that someone was either an Iacona employee or possibly a Daisy Construction employee. They gave him this flash drive of some records.
And what issues were raised in the leak survey that have caused concern?
The summary of the test results, pretty much the entire paragraph. The person who wrote the report indicates that during the leak survey there is the presence of propane vapor in the ground over the entire system. They found some leaks, they repaired them. They found one leak where when he tested, the level of propane was at 85% in the ground. Excuse me, in the ground. I'm surmising some. It looks like when they dug up the pipe to make the repairs, they found it in pretty bad shape. And his comment was that it looked like it had been a long time without cathodic protection because there was severe corrosion and electrolysis. And he mentioned that it looked like during the installation of the pipe, as a coating for protection, they had tried to put on some roofing mastic, which apparently was an old-time construction method, which is not at all approved in today's world. And then lastly, he wrote, I believe that the system is to be unsafe.
And could you just expound a bit? When propane vapor is found in the ground, what is that indicative of?
That there's a leak in the pipeline system.
And did the report also indicate that there were a number of leaks that were actually discovered above the ground?
Oh, yeah. He mentioned also that there was, well, he itemized them. There was 15 leaks that were found at various places above ground, and they were subsequently repaired.
And what is this report was prepared when, per your understanding?
I called Bolton Propane to ask them about that, and their recollection was that this was prepared in May of 2015.
And since May of 2015, what is your understanding of what remedies that Iacona Summer Chase Apartments LP has taken to address some of the issues that were identified in the gas leak survey?
It appears as though they've chosen to switch out their propane pipeline system for a natural gas fueled pipeline system, and they've contracted with Delmarva Power to make that change out for them. And in fact, I was provided by Delmarva Power an agreement of services that they were to provide.
And what was the time frame for completing those services?
The time frame for completing it, I'm not sure was mentioned, but they were not looking to start the project until spring because of some of the difficulties in working through winter weather.
Okay, so to clarify, the gas leak survey was provided to Bolden Propane in May of 2015,
Yes,
and then the action that was taken was to initiate a change over from propane to a natural gas system.
with a whole new pipeline system provided by Delmarva.
And were there any other repairs undertaken in response to the gas leak?
Well, as I said, all of the above ground leaks that were found, the 15 itemized ones, they were all repaired. And according to this paragraph written, at least one major leak was repaired as a result of the leak survey, and it indicates that probably others were well, it says here, there have been numerous leaks found and repaired.
And if Delmarva waits until the spring to start undertaking the switch from propane to natural gas, does that cause any concern for you, given the report about this system in the gas leak survey?
It does cause some concern. Whenever there's a gas leak, it tends to migrate. Propane is heavier than air. It's probably not going to rise. What it will do is follow the path of least resistance, which quite often is along the pipeline. And the pipeline winds up in the building eventually, so the propane could migrate to the building. Through the winter months, more so than any other time of year, when there's deep freeze and frost, the ground starts heaving and shifting, and with a piping system in as bad shape as is indicated by this report, my concern is that there could be additional leaks that would be initiated as a result of that heaving.
And specifically during the winter freezing?
During the winter months.
Can you just explain that just in layman's terms?
Well, as I was saying, in the winter, when the ground freezes, the water that's in the ground will expand, which causes a little bit of heaving and shifting in the soil surrounding those pipes. It's going to move the pipes a little bit, possibly, and then that movement could cause leaks in the pipe.
And based on the information in the gas leak survey and your additional information, have you concluded that there's a serious and imminent threat to life, property, or the environment presented by this system?
Absolutely. Given the nature of this report and the possibilities, I think it's enough to provide concern that this is a hazard to life and property.
And what remedy has staff proposed in the draft order to address this situation immediately?
Well, as I said before, Delmarva was contracted to do this replacement, but they were not thinking about starting until spring. So my recommendation is that Delmarva begin immediately. And while Delmarva is doing their work, starting immediately, and while Delmarva is doing their work, the owner be required to do weekly leak surveys. And any leaks that are found, regardless of the nature of those leaks or how they deem them to be graded, they must make immediate repairs. And then at the end of the 4-month period, I'm suggesting the commission reevaluate the status of things and consider all the possibilities at that time.
And in your understanding, is Delmarva able to accelerate the time frame for this work?
In my discussions with them, they indicated that was within the realm of possibilities, yes.
Is there anything else you'd like to add to your testimony?
I don't think so at this time.
Okay. At this point, I have no further questions for Mr. Platt. If Mr. Iacona would like to, do any cross-examination, I would make him available.
I'm not going to cry. I just want to just make a couple points. First of all, I apologize for my attire. I was on a job site, and I didn't have enough time to change, so I apologize.
Well, I guess I would stop you. At this point, I'll conclude my presentation.
Okay, I'm
And then
sorry.
you'll get to make, if you have, so at this point, if you have any questions for this witness, that would be your opportunity. So if not, I'll finish.
Just clarifications, that's all.
Okay, well, I'll conclude my presentation, and then I'll turn it over
Okay.
to you. So, Commissioners, you've heard Mr. Platt's testimony. The gas leak survey at issue, which was completed in May of this year by a contractor who was the contractor of Mr. Iacona's company, which is the owner of the Village at Canterbury apartment complex, which is at issue here, identified some serious problems, 15 above-ground leaks, evidence of propane in the ground, which is indicative of leaks, some steps to convert this system entirely from propane to natural gas have been taken, but that really is not scheduled to start until the spring. When staff became aware of this issue, they viewed this as a serious and imminent threat to life, property, and the environment, and as such are seeking that the Commission issue a corrective action order immediately in this matter to take effect. I will note that the parties were given notice yesterday of this proposed order, of the staff memorandum. They are here today, but the order also, as drafted, contemplates that the parties could come back at the December 3rd meeting and again have the chance to more fully make their case if they believe that the Commission's remedy is inappropriate. So we're doing our best to both address what we view as an immediate threat to public safety while also affording the parties involved, which includes Mr. Iacona as well as Delmarva, as this order would purport to bind Delmarva to commit to these to this transition to the natural gas system as well. And so it's attempting to balance the needs of public safety that were identified in this report with providing notice and an opportunity to be heard by all the parties. So staff would urge that the Commission adopt the corrective action order. And that concludes my presentation, and I'll turn it over to Mr. Iacona.
Mr. Iacona, do you have any questions of Mr. Platt?
Just clarification, sir.
Please ask him.
Pardon me?
Please
Okay,
ask
yes.
him.
There was some comment made about repairs to the leaks. It's my understanding.
If you're going to testify, you can do that later. I'm just saying, do you have any questions that Mr. Platt would be able to answer?
Yeah, I just one,
Okay.
or actually two. The repair that was done by Construction Unlimited, there was a comment made that they didn't make the repair the way they should have, but yet Construction Unlimited was hired by Bolden, was not hired by Iacona, Summer Chase, nor Daisy, or anybody like that. So I can't comment or understand if Bolden is an operator and Construction Unlimited was hired by Bolden to fix the leak. I would assume that they fixed it correctly. We didn't participate in any of that.
Is that a question for Mr. Platt?
Yes, yeah, I mean.
I don't believe I said it was fixed incorrectly. I just said that Construction Unlimited found some leaks and made repairs. That's my only comment on that.
Okay. And the other comment, or the other question I have is the leaks that you mentioned. Is it your understanding, because it's certainly mine, that all the leaks have been repaired as noted?
All the leaks that were found as a result of the leak survey, it appears, were repaired at that time.
That's all I have.
Thank you, Mr. Iacona. Ms. Iwari?
Oh, thank you, Chair Winslow. I have a couple of questions, and it's, I think, more for educational purposes because I'm not an engineer. You said that propane will find the path of least resistance and will make its way into the buildings. What effect, if any, would that have?
Well, if it travels and finds its way into the building, when it reaches what's known as the lower explosive limit, if it's in a range of explosive limits, if there's a source of ignition, it could cause an explosion.
Okay. And you said that the leak survey report was done in May 2015. Is there no requirement that leak survey reports be submitted to the Commission?
No, there's not.
Thank you.
how old is this system?
I don't know the answer to that.
Now, Ms. Mayrack, when you were asking him the magic question, the way I recorded his answer was it, quote, provides concerns, end of quote. Mr. Platt, is that it? I mean, it just provides some concern, what's going on here just
For this
provides?
report?
Yes, just some concerns?
It does provide deep concerns that the system is in such a state that the possibility of more leaks is very probable, and leaks could possibly lead to an explosion.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair, may I?
Commissioner Gray.
Thank you. I'd like to make or test a couple of assumptions. This gas is used for residential heating and cooking. Is that a good assumption?
Normally, it's used for heating hot water and cooking appliances, yes.
Okay. And so demand and consumption for the fuel is likely to rise during the winter?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Question. Is there any way that a resident can smell any leaks to which they're exposed?
The gas is required to have odorant in it, and you should be able to smell it if there is a leak, yes.
Okay. Thank you. No further.
I have a question.
Commissioner Correa.
You had used the word imminent danger or imminent threat. How imminent is imminent? Like week, 2 weeks?
I can't give you a definite timeline, sir, but my feeling is that it's possible that it could happen at any time. But I don't know what that, I can't state a certain time.
Further questions? Mr. Iacone, would like to testify? Please go ahead. She'll-
First name,
Leonard Iacona.
please raise your right hand. Do you swear that the testimony you're about to give should be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yep. Clarification. Daisy, I own Daisy Construction Company, but Daisy Construction Company really has nothing to do with the Village of Canterbury. Mark Prada is a project manager for Daisy Construction Company. When we realized that the pipes should be replaced, I put Mark in charge of working with DP&L and other sources to find a contractor to replace the entire underground piping system. So that was Mark Prada's role. Daisy has no role in this matter whatsoever. Icono Summer Chase is owned by myself. Sovereign Properties, which is headed by Paul Chandler, manages the complex. As far as the circumstances that evolve around the gas piping, either Paul or Dan can speak to it more so than I can, but it is my understanding that any time there was a leak of any nature, we immediately fixed it and documented it. And as a result of talking to Bolden earlier this year, we all felt that it was worth to replace the entire system throughout the entire complex. And that's exactly what we set out to do. And that's how we came under contract with DP&L to go ahead and replace all the underground piping and supply natural gas as opposed to propane. We have records. It's my understanding that Sovereign Property has extensive records of the care and maintenance of the underground piping. And as I just want to stress that any time we had a leak of any nature, we immediately fixed that leak. And that's all I can tell you about the complex. I don't know anything else about the operational aspects because Sovereign Property really oversees that.
Are you going to call Mr. Chandler as a witness?
Sir, your first name?
Paul,
Please raise your right hand. Do you swear that the testimony you're about to give should be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
And the spelling of your last name, sir?
CHANTLER. Just a few clarifications on relationships. Sovereign Property Management is hired by Iacono Summer Chase Apartments LP to manage the property. Bolden was engaged by us. They signed a contract to provide propane and to provide maintenance of the system. That contract is between Bolden and Iacono Summer Chase Apartments LP. And as Mr. Iacono has just testified, Daisy Construction Company really has no role in this process. When we received the information of the condition of the system, we immediately started getting on the phone with each other and talking about what we were going to do to address this, because that is, I want the commission to understand that we take this very seriously. And Dan can speak after I get done here. He's got complete documentation of all the work that we've done to immediately repair any issues that have been brought to our attention through our own surveys or through Bolden surveys. The most immediate discussion that we had was moving away from propane and going to natural gas. And that prompted us to contact Delmarva Power and talk to them about what was involved in this process. And over a period of time, we were able to engage them, and we have a signed contract. I have a copy for anybody who would like to look at it. The contract was signed on September 30th of this year for them to completely replace the system in the apartment complex. The only other thing that bears mention, and this is something that I'm not totally prepared to discuss in detail, is what has also surfaced very recently, as in today, is a proposal to completely replace the propane system with a propane system. And we haven't had enough time to really evaluate the merits of that proposal because, as I said, we just received it today. But again, I want to reiterate that we take this situation very seriously and always have, and have always immediately responded to any leaks or any other problems we've had with the system throughout this process.
Thank you, Mr. Chandler. Any questions of Mr. Chandler?
May I ask a question? Mr. Chandler, or if anyone who can address it, can you tell us how many leaks have occurred and have been repaired in the last 2 years of the system?
Dan has that information.
There have been, as far as leaks in the actual pipe, underground pipe.
Please identify yourself, and let's have you sworn in, okay?
Daniel McBride.
Do you swear that the testimony you're about to give should be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do. We have replaced 4 sections of the actual underground piping. I do have invoices, receipts, as well as highlighted maps of the exact sections of the pipe that were reported leaking, and we immediately rectified the problems. Again, I did make copies of that, which you're more than welcome to keep. I did highlight your copies also, so you could correspond the work we did with the problems that arose. Also in that information, anytime a meter that's above ground was reported leaking, we immediately contracted that to Bolden, and there are receipts of each individual meter repair or replacement depending on the problem that arose, and all of that is in the photocopied information that I've provided for you.
And how many instances of meters were reported leaking and repaired?
I do not have an exact meter count off the top of my head. To get you in the neighborhood, probably less than 30. And of those, I think somewhere in the area of 20 were outright replaced. The rest were able to be repaired.
So somewhere between 20 and 30 is what you said.
Right in that area, but again, I don't have an exact number for you.
And you have a signed contract with Delmarva to transition the system as of September 30th. How much work or progress has been made as to that contract?
I can speak for our end. Mark Prada and I have been meeting at least twice a week over the last 6 or 7 months, getting our end of it in line. And by that, I mean lining up how many guys we're going to need to follow behind Delmarva. It's going to involve changing out heaters, water heaters, stoves, running electric for the new stoves. So on our end, there's been extensive planning with getting our guys in line to be able to operate on it come springtime, which the contract we had signed had originally stated. So as soon as Delmarva was ready and had their contractors lined up and spring broke, we've done our very best to get our guys in line to not have any gaps in time.
And if a decision were made to now pursue a new propane system, which is the proposal you mentioned just came up yesterday or today, would you basically be starting at square one with the planning?
No, it'd be
No.
easier. And again, I can't comment as to the merits of the proposal. It's too fresh. It's received today.
And how long would you take to make the decision about which way to go?
Probably a week. We need to contact Bolden and vet out some of the details. What I have is a letter of intent. It's 2 pages long.
And just finally, a question for Mr. Iacona. What legal entity owns the Village of Canterbury?
Icono Summer Chase, LLC.
And is Iacona Summer Chase Apartments LP the legal entity that's ultimately responsible for that property and for this propane
I would
gas
assume so,
system?
yes.
Okay, thank you.
Can I just sort of clarify and maybe fill in some of your question there is that with the change to the natural gas, as Dan indicated, you have heating systems, you have some of the stoves, there are some stoves there that are electric, but there are a lot that are propane. You have hot water heaters. Those would all have to be transitioned. They'd have to be taken out, and we'd have to replace all of those with natural gas-oriented appliances.
Which would be new.
They would all be new. We're talking close to $300,000 worth of expenditures here. With and that's why Dan was talking about how it's a logistics challenge in that once Delmarva brings the natural gas to the building, our people would have to immediately, within 1 day, swap out all the appliances, and so that our residents wouldn't be without service for more than a few hours. That's the challenge, which we're more than capable of doing. If you go to a propane system, you don't really have to replace any of these appliances. They're already set up for propane. But again, there may be more involved in this proposal than we're aware of because we haven't had a chance to vet it.
How do you terminate the DP&L contract and go to the?
Another good question. It was just a proposal, an option that was given to us today, and I don't know the ramifications of it. We were very much very comfortable with the Delmarva proposal. We signed the contract. We're ready to move.
Is Delmarva Power and Light able to accelerate their schedule and start the project right away?
We have not talked to DP&L. We received your information yesterday, and we have a call into them, but we have not yet.
They just answered the call. Look, they just said this.
Thank
That
you.
was quick. Good. Mr. Chandler, you're very good. Maybe Mr. Goodman would identify himself for the record, and maybe he can give us some information on this.
Thank you, Chair and members of the Commission. Todd Goodman, on behalf of Delmarva Power. We were looking at this hard last night, obviously, when we received this, and what I've heard is correct. They did reach out to us. There is a contract And I think if I can just give some information that would be helpful to the commission in understanding what's involved. We, as a company, are very willing to start this sooner than we normally would. And I'll get the names wrong, but there was testimony here saying that I think, the contract is signed and we were to begin it when spring broke, which is our normal construction season. We are willing to begin before that. We obviously want to help in any way we can, so we would expedite the schedule. There are a lot of challenges in doing this kind of construction anyway, and they get a little greater in the winter. We talked about, Mr. Platt gave some, I thought, very clear testimony about, heaving and freezing of soils, and you really don't want to be excavating in that. As you can imagine, may I provide you with something that I think may be helpful, a little schematic? It's totally up to you. We're just here to provide information.
Okay, I mean, if it's helpful to understand the situation,
I think it
give
might
it to Ms. Marek and Mr. Iacono and see if they, and Ms. Iwari, see if they have any objection to that being submitted as evidence.
No, we've seen this before. We've seen this before.
I have no objection.
Sure, absolutely.
Pretty poor.
That's all right, Todd, we didn't need one.
I got a bigger one.
Mr. Chandler, are there 34 residential units in Somerton?
There are 336 residential units.
In
There
how
are
many buildings?
There are 34 buildings, 35 if, when you count the clubhouse.
So 300?
336 residential units plus a clubhouse.
So 336 hot water heaters, 336 stoves, of which many are
The stoves, if they are electric stoves, we'll leave them as is. 336 hot water heaters, yes. So but not all of the stoves will need to be replaced.
It's approximately 180 stoves that would be included.
And you said it is possible that on one day you could replace 336?
No.
Not
We're talking, the way the construction would work is they would bring the service to the building, to a building, of which there are 35. And we would have to swap them out for that particular building.
Okay, so that in one day you could do the 4 like that. Okay.
Commissioner Drexler, so that's one of the reasons I thought it'd be helpful for you to have what I handed up, which is just a schematic of the complex, just so the commission could understand the complexity of this. And I didn't mean to say complex and complexity in the same. It's a large complex, 300-something units, and for our construction crews to do this, you look at this, you can see the yellow would be the path of our new lines. And whenever you're doing this in any developed area, but one as tight as this, there's other stuff under the ground, right? Your sewer, your water, electric, and a potentially brittle propane system. And you're doing it in the winter, so it's extra care you're going to have to use when you do this. So we will do our very best to get this done in 4 months, but I think it's just important for people to understand here that there'll be some challenges, and they'll have to exceed with extreme care and caution, as they always do. I mean, people that run a gas company certainly understand the dangers of striking gas or causing a leak. But I just wanted to make sure that the commission knows that if we're called upon to do this, we will do it as quickly as we can with full safety in mind. And the other comment that I just want to make sure the commission understands, and I think it's been made pretty clear by the testimony from the respondents here, is that we just bring it up to the building, and there'll be a whole lot of work that they'll have to do within the building. So just so everyone understands the roles.
Is that an engineer sitting next to you?
It is an engineer, and I brought him in case you did want sworn testimony. If that's what you would like, I will introduce him, and you can ask away.
Please.
Okay, I'd like to introduce Bob Kitson. And Bob, if you could state your full name for the record. And
Robert Kitson. S-O-N.
And maybe you could just, I'm sorry.
Do you swear that the testimony you're about to give should be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes.
Thank you.
Who are you employed by?
Delmarva Power,
Okay. And what is your position at Delmarva?
Manager of Gas Engineering.
Okay. And are you an engineer yourself? Yes, How long have you been with Delmarva?
28 years,
And have you always been in the gas division?
all but 6.
Okay. So you have 22 years in the gas division?
Yes,
Okay. And you have worked on the system for those years?
yes.
Okay. I think it just, Your Honor, it's up to you.
Mr. Kiston, you've heard Mr. Platt testify about his concerns of what may happen. What are your thoughts with, have you actually gone out and looked at this system?
I have not. Our engineers took a visit this morning after I told them we might need to accelerate it. His original plan, the original contract was to finish by May 31st, which seemed like a reasonable time frame. Normally, don't want to do in the winter.
Of 16.
Of 16, yes, next May. And I think it was, originally it was allowed 2 years for the apartment complex to convert. We've done a number of these, and it does take quite a bit of work. Fuel line inspection, there's lots of other things that can crop up. We normally don't want to do work in the winter because we tear up the ground and make it look ugly. This project is fairly large. It's about a mile of gas main we plan to install and about 2 miles of gas services. So that roughly adds up to be 3 to 4 months of physical construction. So what we're, to accelerate, we're cutting out our bidding process and, might work off sketches instead of pretty prints, but that's, we can do that. But it is a fair project. There is some, when the ground freezes, typically it goes from the top down, so that you can have more excavation issues because you're trying to go through the frost line. So you can cause more stuff, and then the other, potential concern would be, as you said, it goes through the path of least resistance. Well, the path of least resistance will be that new trench we just put in. So, that would be another kind of concern about working around facilities in the winter in this case. But,
Are there risks involved with doing the construction in the wintertime?
the risks would be, as I mentioned, the ground could be frozen, so it's harder to do hand dig test holes when you can't, if the ground comes out in chunks. And then in this case, if we're trying to any leaks can flow that path, and us doing excavation can cause vibrations in the ground and loosen up stuff as well. But that can happen any time of year. It's just a little harder in the winter if it's hard. Again, now maybe we'll have a nice winter. Oh, not nice for gas, but nice for everybody else. And once it snows, we really usually can't excavate then because all the missed utility marks are covered up. So there are inclement weather things, but usually some winters we're able to construct, and some winters we're less able.
Do you have any concern that there's more risk involved in doing the winter construction versus waiting till spring and then proceeding in the springtime?
Spring would be our preference to do for all the construction reasons. I don't know of a risk per se other than we are creating a path in the ground now.
Well, you've heard his testimony. Do you share his concerns?
I don't want to make any opinions of their propane system. We would, if we had mains that were suspect, we would do repair similar to what they had done and then schedule it for repair. It is. Pardon me?
I think you meant replacement?
Yes, replacement. We'd schedule replacement sometime in the future and monitor it. So, and we do leak surveys generally annually for similar properties.
Ms. Varick? Commissioner Gray?
Please go ahead.
After Delmarva switches the system over to natural gas, who would maintain responsibility over maintenance of that system?
Delmarva Power.
So it would basically take Bolden, Sovereign, and Iacona Summer Chase Apartments out of the business of maintaining that natural gas system.
The underground system, again,
Up
they
to the building.
maintain the above ground.
Whereas the current situation is they have full responsibility for the propane system under the ground and in the buildings.
I don't know who has what responsibility. But
Okay, fair enough.
Mr. Correa?
I have a question for Mr. Iacono. You had mentioned that when you find the leak, you immediately repair the leak.
Yes, that's my
which is ve-
understanding.
Yes, very good. Now, our engineer has testified that he found 15 leaks above ground with one major leak. So what happens with these 15 leaks? Do they come up all of a sudden, or they were coming up and were ignored, or you were in the process of repairing them?
I've owned the complex now for how many years, would you say?
9 years.
9 years. So the leaks in question happened over that period of time. It's not something that happened, you know, in 1 year or 2 years or whatever the case may be. It was during, when I took the project over, we contracted with Bolden, and then Sovereign Properties was immediately hired to manage the property. So the leaks that we've experienced, whether they were gas pipe leaks or meters or whatever the case may be, happened over that period of 9 years. It's not something that happened in any one given year. It's the May 15th report. We immediately huddled up and said that the best route to go would be to replace the entire system. And then we immediately started to do investigation, one of being which contacting DP&L and negotiated to get DP&L under contract and to do the work. The other reason why we scheduled it to the spring, other than the adversity of working in the soils in the wintertime, and as a road contractor, I can say for 40 years of experience, depends on the winter itself, whether it's mild or extreme. You know, sometimes you could get as much as a foot of frost in a given month. But nobody knows that, what the winter's going to be like. But the other issue was the reason why we waited for the spring, because we have to change out all the appliances within the buildings, and we didn't want to run the risk of disrupting our tenants in case, something happened with the appliances or something like that. So we didn't want them to be without heat or things of that nature. So there was really a lot of thought put into the timing. One obviously is weather, but the other one was trying to disrupt our tenants. And that's the thought. Because obviously from a financial standpoint, we could start tomorrow. It was not a financial decision. It was just based on those two factors.
So these 15 leaks that occurred over 9-year period, no one found it, no one smelled it. What happened?
I can't answer that.
Yeah.
No, just the 15 leaks have been recent.
Just to clarify, because I think there's misunderstanding, the 15 leaks that keeps getting brought up, those were found during this one inspection. Now, prior to this one inspection, there had not been this overall property test done in several years, to the best of my knowledge. So as soon as we got this report and these issues were brought to our attention, we immediately had every one of them corrected, which, again, we have all these receipts to provide to you. Now, Mr. Iacono is correct that these did occur over X amount of years because the company prior that was supposed to be overseeing this system wasn't quite doing their job. So it had been neglected. Once Bolden came in, we have a great relationship with Bolden. They got all these records in line. We corrected all the problems. So I think that may be where there's a little bit of miscommunication. The 15 leaks that are in the report were immediately corrected, and we did provide you with receipts and maps showing exactly what was replaced.
Mr. Chair?
Yes, sir.
So if I'm a resident living in one of these units, how much do I know about this challenge that is in front of you guys?
As of today, not much. The preparation has been on the back end of the office. Now,
So how many reports have you received or are you aware of that have come from residents with regard to experiencing the smell of gas?
I don't work on that on site in that property, so I wouldn't be able to tell you how many residents.
Are you aware of any reports from residents of
I'm
the
not.
smell of gas?
I'm not, no.
Any of your other partners?
No, sir.
No.
No? It would seem to me, I mean, it's a pretty interesting balance of priorities here, but if you get this job underway in the winter and the second part of that deployment requires replacement of appliances and you get a big snowstorm, are you on risk of putting some residents out of heat?
We were going to order the appliances in advance and have them stored on the property so that as a building came available, our sovereign staff would take care of that building in a day. So we would make sure before we took anything offline that we had all the appliances ready to go.
Okay.
But we would have to mass order all the appliances that we need. We did a survey of how many, it's my understanding that we did a survey of all the buildings on exactly how many of hot water heaters and stoves and et cetera, that we needed, and that we were going to buy them in bulk and have them stored ready to go.
It would seem to me, regardless at the end of the day, if I'm a resident, that you would have some type of a communications program to inform me and others that you're coming, because that's a very disruptive process as I'm thinking about it logistically.
You are correct, but we didn't anticipate this process starting until the spring of 16. But you are absolutely correct that they have to be totally informed and be ready for this switch out. I will tell you that there has been conversation with people telling them that we are going to go with natural gas, and they view that as being positive, as we do. But
do they understand the ramifications?
They don't probably understand the ramifications of us going in there and replacing their appliances in one day.
No further questions.
Mr. Conaway.
I have a question to Mr. Platt. How many years elapsed between inspections on these pipes?
Well, for the leak survey, the regulations require that be done once every 5 years.
Okay.
Now, in the records that I saw that are actually attached here, it looks to me like what they were doing was taking, like maybe say 20% of the system and leak surveying it so that at the end of each year, so that at the end of 5 years they complete it and they started the cycle again. Because our past inspections had showed that they were within the requirements that they needed to meet for their leak survey results. I think what was different about this time was they elected to do a leak survey of the entire complex all at once, is what it looked like to me.
Thank you.
Is it Kitson?
Yes.
I have a question for you. Do you have any experience with a changeover from a propane system in a large community like this to a natural gas system? In your experience, have you experienced this before where there was a failing system?
Yes.
And was the work done in the spring?
Yes. We've had there's natural gas ones and propane, there's different systems.
Oh, yeah. Have you ever done them in the winter?
We do work in winter if the weather permits. So that would be, again, our intent would be when our work completes for the year. So as we're doing things, we've told other customers similarly that, your project will be next year's project. And then we wind down this year because the asphalt plants usually close in the next month or so. DelDOT puts plate rules on where you can't use steel plates on the roads. So then we're looking for projects where we're not doing that. This one probably there weren't any state maintained roads, but the asphalt plants will be closed, so we're going to be probably not getting the state grade asphalt for that.
Anything on this scale of 35 buildings and
No, typically when we've done projects accelerated them, when we do our cast iron replacement projects, we might replace the mains this time of year and wait for the services for the spring. So that's why sometimes you'll see delays in when we do our projects, so we get the new mains in. Because For us, it typically takes about, when we're doing renewal projects, about a day per customer. So if this was our project, again, you can obviously put more crews on, but this, a 300 service replacement project would be like a project for the year, not one we would accelerate that quickly. But in this case, they're doing, half the work. But they probably have the harder part of the job.
Is there any more testimony or questions by council? Any commissioner have any comments or questions for Commissioner Conaway?
Mr. Chairman, for the record, I would like to disclose that Mr. Iacona is a past client of my husband's business, but there presently is no business relationship, and I do believe I can objectively vote on this matter. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. Now, just to sort of talk out loud a little bit, I'm a little uncomfortable about whether or not the standard has been met with respect to the request to basically force the situation into a construction during the middle of winter time and the problems that might occur as a result of that. In order to get it done at some period of time faster than the 3 months it was going to take, because it's going to take 3 months if you started in the spring?
We plan to finish by May 31st.
May 31st. So I'm just not sure, number one, whether the standard really has been met, because you talked about some concern, my concern, provides concerns. It seems like to me we could put something, maybe we could reschedule to December 3rd to find out if there's some way that this can be monitored over the winter time, so if there's in fact some substantial problem that could be addressed. I don't know. I guess what I'm trying to say to you is I'm a little hesitant to force the owners into this move when all of the fixes have been promptly apparently repaired and we're not aware of any present leaks. The system apparently has been there for a fair number of years, and there's always the concern that Mr. Platt talks about in the wintertime in terms of the propane, but there's really no certainty with respect to any problem that would occur. I'm just a little perplexed by this, what to do in this situation. It seems to me that Mr. Iacona, to his great credit, and to the people who worked on that project, that they've been very responsible. They seem to be responsive. They're all here. So I'm sort of inclined to suggest that the parties talk to each other a little more intensively about the merits of proceeding sooner rather than later, and see if you can come to some understanding with respect to this matter. I don't know. Ms. Mayrek, is there any reason to continue the discussion? Or?
Well, I would point out a key component and one of the 4 remedies recommended by the corrective action order is a weekly leak survey, which would involve more intensive monitoring of this system, which historically has had problems. We've heard testimony to that fact. In May of this year, there were 15 separate leaks that were discovered and repaired. So at least with respect to the weekly monitoring, a more intensive monitoring program, because we've talked about inconvenience. We've talked about how inconvenient it would be to be switching appliances. I can think of nothing more inconvenient to the tenants of this property if there were an incident, and by that I mean an explosion. So I think there is a safety component here, and that's why staff has brought this to you. And you've heard from staff's testimony, if it wasn't clear, that staff views this as an imminent and serious threat to public safety. And yes, there are costs involved, and we're sympathetic to that, but at least to the extent that there is a weekly and more intense monitoring component in this corrective order, and then it directs the parties to get started forthwith. I mean, we're hearing today there's all of a sudden a completely new proposal that hasn't been considered. I mean, again, we have the interests of the residents and the safety of those residents, while we appear to be going back to the drawing board and considering a completely new proposal. So our intent is to increase monitoring, to push the parties to move this along really with the safety of the residents in mind.
Do you feel that what discussions with respect to Mr. Iacona would be worthwhile to incorporate what you just suggested into an order?
Well, I mean, you have staff's view here. We would like to see weekly monitoring. We would like to see this accelerated. Delmarva is agreeable to do so. I think that's staff's view.
Mr. Iacona, what do you think?
Well, one of the things that we talked about in our meetings with DP&L about getting started in the winter, if something catastrophic happened in the state, a winter storm or a blizzard came in, they would have to pull forces off. One thing we didn't want to get into a situation where the job got started and then it got delayed or it came to a stop. There's so many things that you deal with in the winter. And as I said, I've been doing this for over 40 years, and I will tell you that, you know, it's a pick winter type situation where we just wanted to start the project and have continuity. We just wanted to be able to get in, start the project, and finish it without it being an interruption of any nature, whether it's weather, snow, emergency situation that DP&L may be called away from this project for whatever the reasons may be. And when you're changing heaters over in the middle of a winter, not that we anticipate any problem, but, you know, Murphy's Law could come into play. We were just trying to, like I said, this was not a financial decision of any nature to delay this or postpone it. It made construction sense from a standpoint of waiting to the spring to do this. If DP&L wants to get started, and, you know, we're certainly all for it, and they can work it to whatever weather says they can't work. Because one of the things that was mentioned, if there's a snow or whatever, and you can't see missed utility markings and things of that nature, they're going to be forced to stop. So if DP&L is willing to get started sooner, we're certainly willing to accommodate that. But there's probability that it may not be completed, and it's going to have to be resumed in the spring.
Ms. Iori?
Thank you, Chairman. So I have a question for Mr. Kitson.
Yes.
If Delmarva started, say, next week, how long, and you were expediting this, obviously, how long, assuming everything went as planned, would it take to get this entire complex refitted with natural gas pipelines and services?
With check materials would be one thing. So if we have material in stock and we could start immediately, but we need to design the project, and it's only been a schematic. So we'd have our technicians at 15,000 feet. Again, 3 to 4 months is a reasonable construction period. So we're cutting out is the normal bidding process. When we go out to bid, that's typically a 6-week process. So we'd be sole sourcing this to either internal resources or a contractor that's available. So we have to check availability, but sometimes in the winter, lots of people aren't doing construction. But, material would be one other issue we'd have to look into.
My math's not too good, but it sounds like you save 2 months, and then you have the additional risk of the winter excavation and work, which may cause delays. I'm just having a hard time seeing a real clear path forward on this project being made to be done immediately. I can see where it could start immediately, and you can do some, maybe November, and if maybe maybe December can generally be relatively moderate, but I wouldn't want to guess on January and February, Mr. Kitson, right?
No, again, I don't. Depends upon the winter. You know, again, we're saying a mild winter. You know, so we could go through if it's a bad winter. There could be delays.
So, Mr. Chair,
Commissioner Gray?
so my sense as I sit here is that there's a whole constituency missing, and these are the residents. And you can rush this in tomorrow, but if you've not communicated to them that you're going to come into their property in a course of time to trade out their heater, which, if there's a hiccup, may not work in that context, that may be more of a problem than moving the project forward. You may have a revolt from your residents. So when the order has the request for weekly monitoring, and I know you don't want to panic your residents, but, you know, you got 300 and some other monitors in the residents themselves. Can you set up a call center somewhere over the course of the winter in the event someone experiences a leak that they could call immediately? I mean, these are alternatives in addition
really
to the considerations.
We really already have that in place. We have 24-hour on-call. So if any type of a maintenance issue comes up, whether it be a broken pipe or a ceiling that's leaking or anything like this, they have a phone number that they can call at any time, and we have somebody who's constantly on call to respond to that. So if there is the odor, if they smell an odor, they can call us immediately, and we would respond to it immediately.
It just seems to me that if you accelerate the initiation of this project, you're going to really compress the time you have to communicate and prepare the folks who are going to be impacted by it. That has to be a key element of moving this forward.
Yeah, well, I agree with that, but we also have to keep in mind what Ms. Rayrack is arguing, based upon Mr. Platt's testimony, is that it's a hell of a lot better than having an explosion, and then that's going to be a disaster.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, you know, they're going to get notification because it's going to take water, power, and light time to get this thing planned. They're not going to start construction immediately. But I do think that Commissioner Gray's concerns about the residents are well founded. So let's decide to do something here, Commissioners.
My motion would be to adopt corrective action order number 8813 as presented.
Is there a second for the motion to adopt that corrective order?
I'll second it.
Is there any further discussion with respect to the corrective order motion? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 All those opposed? All those abstaining? Motion passes unanimously. Thank you, Mr. Iacono, and your very able assistance there. Appreciate your coming today. Appreciate your input. And we certainly wish you well and the residents safety. Thank you. Number 2 is the matter of the petition of the Delaware Division of the Public Advocate and the Caesar Rodman Institute to request the Public Service Commission, etc. Would all the parties in that matter please come forward? And what we're going to do first is Ms. Iori, we're going to address the petitions to intervene. Do you have any objections with the motions to intervene? Okay, I didn't think you did, but just for the record, I thought we might mention that. So I see that we have Mr. Stevenson from the Caesar Rodney Institute. I see we have Ms. Scott Denrick. We've heard from Dr. Firestone. We've heard we've gotten a battleship barrage back from Ms. Iori. And I think we're ready to go. But before we do, I think we'd like to make it official and have a vote to permit the intervention of DENREC and Caesar Rodney Institute as parties in this matter. So I move that.
Second.
Is there any discussion on the motion to permit the interventions? Hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? The motion passes 4-0. Okay. So I guess, Ms. Iori, it's your
Am I up?
your motion, so please proceed.
Thank you, Chair Winslow and Commissioners. First, I have an apology to make in filing our barrage on Thursday. I was not in my office, and I neglected to attach what I said I had attached as Exhibit A. I do apologize, but here it is.
Thank you.
I thought it would be easier to follow along. I have printed out copies of the statutes that are at issue here. On page 1, you have 26 Delaware Code, sections 354I and J, and on the reverse, you have 26 Delaware Code, section 362B. But it might be easier for everybody to follow along. You didn't have to be looking through people's submissions for that. Now, I was going to say, I noted that the agenda didn't identify that we had filed a response, but you apparently got it and read it. I thank you for that. In that response, we addressed the arguments as they appeared in the joint motion filed by DENREC and the commission staff, but doing it that way made our response somewhat more convoluted than the issue really is, in our opinion. So for purposes of oral argument, I'm going to approach the issue in a more streamlined fashion, and hopefully this will be much shorter that way. Now, our petitions and DENREC's and the staff's joint motion both require the commission to interpret statutes, and specifically the statutes that I've just handed out to you, 26 Delaware Code, sections 355I and J, and section 362B. And there are a few canons of statutory construction implicated for the Renewable Energy Portfolio Standard Act, or REPSA, amendments that we're discussing here. Now, the first canon of statutory construction is that words used in a statute must be given their ordinary meaning. And if the language of the statute is clear, then that's it. The person or court or commission interpreting the statute does not go further. It doesn't look at legislative history or other aids that the courts have identified in the event that a statute is ambiguous. Now, Section 362B clearly places the responsibility for promulgating rules governing the procedures for freezing the minimum solar requirements authorized under Section 354 small I on the Commission and only the Commission.
Where does it say, and only the commission?
Because it identifies, take a look at 362B.
I have it right here, thanks to you.
Okay, and, sorry, let me get my own copy of it. For regulated utilities, the Commission shall further adopt rules and regulations to specify the procedures for freezing the minimum cumulative solar voltaic requirement as authorized under Section 354 small I and J of this title. The REPSA defines Commission in Section 352.2 as the Delaware Public Service Commission. The REPSA also defines DENREC in Section 352.5, and importantly, DENREC is not defined as the Commission. So the Commission, and only the Commission, has the authority to adopt rules and regulations specifying the procedures for freezing the minimum solar requirements. Next, we get to the interpretation of the word procedures. DENREC and staff have argued that DENREC isn't proposing procedures, it's just proposing regulations that govern how it administers its obligations under Sections 354I and J. But again, words used in a statute must be given their ordinary meaning. And a procedure is an act, method, or manner of proceeding in some action, the sequence of steps to be followed. What is promulgating regulations that will govern how a regulatory agency administers its obligations, if not a procedure? We respectfully submit that the joint motion's definition tortures all meaning out of the word. Now, going back to the statutes, it does get a little more difficult with respect to whether the Commission also has authority to promulgate rules specifying the procedures for freezing the minimum eligible energy resource requirements, because the General Assembly left that specific language out of Section 362B. It is not a model of draftsmanship. But the General Assembly also said in Section 362B that the Commission has authority to promulgate procedures for freezing the requirements, quote, as authorized under sections 354I and J of this title, end quote. And if you look at subsection 354J, it addresses only eligible energy resources. And this is where the next canon of statutory interpretation comes into play, and that is that the object of statutory interpretation is to discern the legislature's intent from the language used. If the General Assembly had only intended the Commission to have authority over promulgating rules specifying the procedures for freezing the minimum solar requirements, it would not have included the reference to subsection J. So obviously then, the General Assembly intended to include promulgating rules specifying the procedures for freezing the minimum eligible energy resource requirement within the Commission's bailiwick as well. And indeed, in the regulations that the Commission did promulgate back in 2011, the Commission interpreted Section 362B to include eligible energy resources as well. So under well-established tenets of statutory construction, there is really only one interpretation of who has the authority for promulgating regulation procedures for freezing the minimum renewable requirements under Sections 354I and J, and that is this Commission. And since the legislation gives that authority only to the Commission, in the absence of legislative authority otherwise, the Commission may not delegate that authority to another agency. So the current regulations in which it appears to do that exactly that are invalid. Now, we made this argument in our petitions, but DENREC and the staff didn't address it, which isn't surprising since they contend that DENREC does have the authority to make the regulations, and so you never get to that argument. But as we have shown, it does not. So regardless of whether arguments could have been raised when the Commission considered this in 2011, the fact of the matter is that if the Commission doesn't have the authority to delegate, then its attempt to delegate that authority to DENREC is invalid, and therefore the Commission must promulgate the regulations. Now, addressing DENREC's and staff's contentions that our interpretation writes DENREC's responsibilities out of the statute, it does not. We agree that DENREC has the responsibility for determining that the total cost of compliance with the renewable energy requirements exceeds the 1% and or 3% thresholds. That is what sections 354I and J say, and that language is clear. We also agree that DENREC and the PSC, in consultation with each other, will determine whether there should be a freeze, if in fact the thresholds are met. That's what sections 354I and J say, and that language is also clear. All we are saying is that this Commission, not DENREC, is the entity to whom the General Assembly gave the authority to promulgate regulations specifying the procedures for freezing the minimum renewable resource requirements. What those regulations will be is another question, and that need not be answered here because that is step 2. If the petitions are granted, the Commission will reopen the regulation docket. The staff will circulate proposed regulations. Interested entities will submit comments pursuant to the Administrative Procedures Act, and the Commission will ultimately determine the regulations that it will approve. Regarding the comments of other entities that have weighed in, the House Minority Caucus comments address the statutory language. They support the petition. Marek's comments don't address the statutory language. Marek does not support the petition. Dr. Firestone does mention the statutory construction arguments, but only in a footnote, and he advances the same argument that the joint movements made, which I won't repeat. He also argues, as do the joint movements, that our petitions are a collateral attack on the regulations that the Commission adopted in 2011. But as we pointed out in our response to the joint motion, the Commission has reopened regulation dockets in the past to consider changes, and the Commission's orders always contain a provision that the Commission retains authority to enter such further orders as may be necessary or proper. The Commission has also, the Commission also has the ability to reopen regulation dockets on its own initiative, and we could argue whatever we wanted in that case. Dr. Firestone also complains that the petitioners didn't serve him with a copy of the petition, so he didn't know about this proceeding. To that, we simply say that we weren't required to provide him with a copy. Delafile is open to the public. He could easily sign up for notices of anything that gets filed, as many of the parties in this room have. And finally, we filed our petition a month ago. Now, it's understand why supporters of renewable power don't want the caps to be triggered ever, but the General Assembly specifically provided for caps in the event that renewable power became too expensive. And again, I want to make sure that it's clear. It is not that Delmarva will not have to purchase any renewable power if the caps are triggered. It's just that if the caps are triggered, it stops where it is. Once a freeze is undeclared, the requirements come back into play. So with that, I will turn the rest of the argument over to my colleague, Mr. Stevenson, unless the commissioners have any questions for me.
I have a question for you. I hear your argument, but I don't see any statute that takes any authority away from DENREC to do whatever regulations that they might think are appropriate under these statutes.
Well, it doesn't give them the authority. That's why you don't see anything, Commissioner Winslow. The statute specifically gives the commission the authority and defines the commission as the Delaware Public Service Commission. It doesn't define it as DENREC.
I know that, but I guess maybe DENREC will give us their take on that.
Well, I will say DENREC argues that their general grant of power in 7 Delaware Code 8003-7, which gives the secretary the ability to propose regulations and adopt regulations, gives them the authority. But as we responded, that is just a general grant of authority to the secretary, much as Section 29 Delaware Code Section 8716 provides the general grant of powers and duties to the public advocate. And under another canon of statutory construction, if there are two statutes that are inconsistent, which we would argue in that case that would be here, one giving DENREC secretary the authority, the other giving the commission the authority, the more specific statute controls and the more recent statute controls. And in both cases, the more recent statute and the more specific is Section 362B.
Just to be, I see out in the audience here my friend Phil Cherry from DENREC, and I confess that I have a fond recollection of Mr. Cherry being sitting up here with us and making a decision with respect to Blue Water issue. And I noticed that, that this statute says that DENREC's supposed to do in consultation with the commission, and you're saying that the commission has the right to do the regulations, DENREC doesn't. They're saying, I'm not so sure I get a great teamwork feeling here with respect to this, and I guess it's because of the legislation. Now, having said that, I've been remiss. Is there a representative or elected official in the audience that would like to come forward and identify themselves and participate? It doesn't appear that there is. And I confess that, the procedures, I'm not sure what in consultation means, and I'm not sure that the procedures that we have initiated, when I read them, I go, I confess that some of your argument seems to ring pretty true in terms of what it says. I'm sorry, I'm digressing. Commissioner, I'm sorry.
Was there a question that you wanted me to answer? Because I think there might have been.
I'm just rambling. Mr. Stevenson.
Yes, in support of what the public advocate has said, what Councilor Iori has said, David Stevenson with the Caesar Rodney Institute. When this was passed in 2010, there was no Energy and Climate Division. There wasn't a Fuel Cell Act. Things have changed, which lends additional credence to the need to reopen this and relook at this. But I think the other thing is just a matter of clarity. What we're asking for is that the commission get involved in establishing a procedure for doing the calculation of whether we are over the thresholds or we are not. it's fairly simple process. You get some data, and that comes in compliance reports that come to the commission. You have a numerator, which is the compliance cost, which is already shown on customers' electric bills. It has been since July of 2014, plus the Green Energy Fund. And then you have a denominator, which is the total cost of power. The only real question mark in doing a calculation at this point is, what is the denominator? It's the total cost of electricity. Is that just the supply cost, or does that also include the transmission and distribution cost? When we get down to it, that's the question that needs to be answered if this docket goes forward. So there are arguments on both sides of that. The docket should not be lengthy. It should not be a big delay, particularly since we've been delayed for 5.5 years already and never have done a calculation. So the idea is that the commission would take that over in a procedural process. What it is not, DENREC does claim the authority to waive a freeze, even if the thresholds are met, and it's right and proper that if they do, that they have a separate procedure to establish that would tell them, all right, what are we going to consider if we've in our decision not to waive this, and that's things like externalities of health impacts and economic impacts, that they will put that together, and they need to do that because otherwise it might look capricious or arbitrary. So we're not saying DENREC doesn't have a role in this activity. Their role is to look at, when they consult with you, why are they telling you something? But the actual calculation, it makes a heck of a lot more sense for the Public Service Commission. I'm not the lawyer here. I'm just looking at common sense. It makes a lot more sense for the commission to do that calculation. So we finally have, after 5.5 years, an actual number as to where we stand, which we have never had.
Thank you, Mr. Stevenson. Thank you for speaking about the real issue. Any questions of Mr. Stevenson?
Yes, I have a question, Mr. Chair. You said the calculation hasn't been done in 5 years?
5.5, yes.
Why not?
I think that would be better asked of DENREC, but the first iteration of a regulation from DENREC didn't occur until, I think, late 2012 or into 2013. There have been 4 iterations of regulations proposed by DENREC. 3 of them have been withdrawn. Each has had a series of public comments. There's a time delay every time you come out with a proposed regulation. There's a comment period, and then DENREC is supposed to respond to the comments, which they've never done. Each iteration has been different from the previous one. We've never had an explanation of why a new iteration came out to begin with, but this just drags on and drags on and drags on. Before, we had an iteration in December, I think, of this last year. We thought that might be the final one, and we would actually get a regulation we could use to calculate whether we're there or not, and that has drug on since then. There was another iteration October 1st, another one November 1st, because apparently they published the wrong thing. But this just drags on and drags on and drags on. Back of the envelope calculations, because we have this on the electric bills now, if you have just the supply cost, if you're dividing by the supply cost of electricity, we're probably looking at 6% instead of 3%, which is the cap. If you take out if you don't use, if you just use the supply cost, it's 9%. If we use the transmission and distribution, it's 6%. So it appears that we are over the limit based on the electric bills, but we just keep dragging out the answer here as to where we are.
Okay, thank you.
Any more questions? Let's see, who's next? Staff, I guess?
Staff is next, I believe.
Yes, go ahead, Ms. Mayrak.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Commissioners. You have the joint petition, which was filed by PSC staff and DENREC, opposing the petition of the Public Advocate and the Cesar Rodney Institute. You have our arguments there. Just briefly, you've heard Mr. Stevenson talk about what makes sense, how calculations have not been completed over a number of years. Unfortunately, as you are well aware, this commission's authority is established by the legislature and by statute. And it is established and limited by the statutes. Therefore, this commission has no authority to, without that statutory grant of authority or contravention of it, to do what it might think makes sense or what someone might think makes sense, or because a process may not be proceeding as quickly or to the satisfaction of other parties. As Ms. Iori points out, it goes back to the statutory language, and she's accurately cited tenets of statutory interpretation, and it's always amazing how two lawyers can view the same statute and the same tenets and come up with the exact opposite position. But she's right. The language of the statute is clear. The terms have to be given ordinary meaning. I'd also add that to the extent different sections might appear to be in contradiction, any interpretation has to attempt to give weight and meaning to all parts of the statute and to somehow reconcile them. And Section 362, which clearly states that the Commission shall further adopt rules and regulations to specify the procedures as authorized under 354 I and J. I think that that's the key clause that has to be integrated into any interpretation of this Commission's authority. Rules and regulations specifying the procedures as authorized under I and J. So now we have to go reconcile this and incorporate I and J. Well, I and J puts forth what is a bifurcated process. It is involving, and I'm just going to use DENREC because the various entities have changed. DENREC has a role here to play, and that is how the legislature has established this. And whether we like it or not, or whether we think it makes sense or not, that defines this Commission's authority, that DENREC has a role to play. And in fact, the primary responsibilities, you have two entities, and the entity that is, the agency that's primary and secondary is shifting throughout this process. So while the Commission has primary authority to set those regulations, then that switches, and DENREC has primary responsibility to set these calculations and determine when a freeze occurs. So necessarily, 362 has to incorporate, as authorized in this bifurcated system that is envisioned under 354. And that's what the language of the statute says, and that's what statutory interpretation requires. I will note quickly that this Commission has already addressed this issue. Order number 7933, when these regulations were promulgated in 2011, this Commission directly addressed this issue at that time. And as we know, DENREC is in the process of formulating these regulations. Now, there may be dissatisfaction with how long that process is taking or the substance of that process, but the proper remedy for that dissatisfaction is probably before DENREC or the General Assembly. It's inappropriate to ask this Commission to exceed its statutory mandate because of how that process might be proceeding at DENREC.
No, unless, of course, they have a valid legal argument, that, which I think that they're making a very forthright and perfectly straightforward argument about the interpretation of the statute. I don't see anything untoward, so to speak, about what she's asking the Commission to do.
Except that, as staff would argue, the statute does carve out a role for DENREC. That's how this Commission has previously interpreted it, and that's how this is proceeding now.
Well, I agree with you 100%. When I look at the statute here, the I and J, obviously the big dog in the room is DENREC. We're the subsidiary to it. But that's not necessarily the end of the argument. Okay, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
So, it's also my understanding that there, we have had some comments filed by legislators with their interpretation of this statute. It's also my understanding, and I want to bring it to the Commission's attention, that there may be draft legislation circulating that would radically alter this statute and clarify it, which may suggest actually that the current interpretation, which does have a bifurcation, which does have a role for DENREC, is the interpretation. If there are legislators out there who think that it needs to be clarified, and if that's the prerogative of the General Assembly, if they want to change the statute to clearly give this to DENREC or clearly give this to the commission or completely change it, that's their prerogative, and then we change it. But if, under the current statute and that regime, staff's position is that this petition should be denied, that the docket should be closed, and that the DENREC rulemaking process should proceed. I'll also note, I have Pam Knotts here to provide further substantive and historical perspective if that's necessary to the commission. She is available.
Thank you very much. Any questions of Ms. Mayrack?
Perhaps. If this, were you saying that Order 7923 in the year 2011 adopted rules and regulations to specify the procedures as stated in 26 Delaware 362B?
Give me one moment,
Chair Gray, I can answer that question,
Yeah, I know,
at least from the public advocate's perspective.
Well,
I can address it, although I know you are familiar at the time. Yes, this order was in Regulation Docket 56, adopting the regulations. And in paragraph 21, which is what I'm referring to specifically here, is that the commission determined not to go forward with these cost caps, which is what the public advocate is now asking the commission to revisit, because it was more properly dealt with by DENREC.
But for point of clarification, this statute 26 says adopt rules and regulations to specify procedures. What I think you said to me didn't say anything about procedures.
Right, the procedures that were adopted envisioned a role for DENREC. That's correct. I believe what the public advocate is asking now is that we revisit those procedures to carve out a further role for the commission.
Okay, can I ask the public advocate to weigh in here, please?
Thank you, because I really would like to weigh in. We think, as I said, the statute is clear. The statute gives that authority to the commission. The regulations to which Ms. Mayrack is referring, all they actually do is regurgitate the language of the statute. There is nothing in those regulations. If you hold them up, they will be word for word identical to the language of the statute. And we are not trying to carve out a further role for the commission. We are asking the commission to exercise the role that the General Assembly gave it. We don't disagree with Ms. Mayrack that there is a role for DENREC in this thing. But we have said what that role is, or I shouldn't say we have said. The General Assembly has said what that role is. And I keep losing my statute. But the General Assembly has said that the State Energy Coordinator, DENREC, in consultation with the Commission, may freeze the requirements. That's in both I and J. So DENREC's role is to consult with the Commission in determining whether to freeze the requirements. If DENREC determines that the total cost of complying with the requirement exceeds the statutory thresholds, there is DENREC's responsibility. We don't dispute either of those.
So, just close out this line of questioning again. I'm curious to know, has the commission adopted rules and regulations to specify the procedures for freezing?
We would argue that it has not, that it abdicated that responsibility to DENREC.
And
staff would argue that, yes, Regulation 56, which is in the Delaware Administrative Code, does address the procedures.
is that this commission's
Yes, this
product?
commission. Yes.
Identify one of those procedures for me. I've read that, and I must admit that I think what Ms. Iori says is correct. It's just a recitation of the statute. And I'm not sure that we set up any procedures at all.
It's 26 Delaware Codes, Section 3008, and the specific regulation under that is 3.2.21.
If there's any failure therein, I think that only the Commissioner Conaway is at fault. No,
Thank you.
Commissioner Conaway and myself are at fault because we were the only ones present.
2011.
But further to that, Mr. Chair, if there are rules that have been adopted procedures to specify for the freezing. It would be helpful for at least one commissioner to see what they look like and have that product to review.
Well, I think I have it here. I'm not positive.
Listen,
like-
if
like
you
a
get on
break,
your,
I could
if you
get
get
a
on your
copy for all of
computers and
Yeah.
look up Delaware Administrative Code.
I'd be
It's
happy.
quoted in the
Code
briefing,
online.
it's quoted in the briefing.
Yes, that's true. It is in our response. Let me find you the page. I do apologize, I should. It is on page 3, paragraph 5 of the response of the Delaware Division of the Public Advocate and Caesar Rodney Institute to the joint motion of DENREC and the PSC. Paragraph 5 continues on to page 6, and there is what the regulation purporting to implement section 354I and J. If you look at that, it is pretty much identical. Well, no, what it says is the Delaware Energy Office must determine that the cost of complying with the requirements of this regulation exceeds 1% for solar and 3% for eligible energy resources. That is essentially what the sections 354I and J say. There are no further, quote, procedures.
But I would add, it is in the discretion of the administrative agency adopting the rules to make those rules and regulations as specific or non-specific as they deem appropriate. And this commission did consider it in 2011 as part of Reg Docket 56, and that is the regulation that this commission adopted.
And as I worry, we would respond, I'll respond for it. We can reopen the regulation docket anytime we want to based upon the good reason presented to us. So, okay.
I would,
Ms.
Chair
Wentworth?
Winslow, I would also respond that simply reiterating the terms of the statute isn't exactly making a regulation.
We need to hear from Ms. Scott. Then, right.
Afternoon, Chairman, Commissioners. I'm Deborah Scott from the Department of Justice, and I represent DENREC. And with me today is Tom Lewis, who's the principal planner for utility policy for the Division of Energy and Climate. I have, and he will be available if you have questions about the regulatory process that is ongoing at DENREC. But I just wanted to make a
Has he been around long enough for this?
I just wanted to make a few points. Public Advocate and Caesar Rodney, they've petitioned the PSC to amend its regulations to add procedures for freezing the renewable portfolio standards. They're claiming that DENREC's proposed regulations are usurping the PSC's authority by creating procedures for freezing the RPS. It's DENREC's position that the Public Advocate and Caesar Rodney's issue is not with the adequacy of the PSC's regulations, but with DENREC's proposed regulations. And that being said, if the Public Advocate and Caesar Rodney, if their issue is truly with DENREC's regulations, proposed regulations, first of all, that issue isn't even ripe at this point because those proposed regulations are still proposed. They haven't been finalized. And seeking an advisory opinion from the Commission on DENREC's regulatory authority, through the back door of, asking the Commission to amend its regulations we feel is improper. If the Public Advocate and Caesar Rodney, are not happy with DENREC's regulations or feel that they are unlawful, they have a means to address their concerns. The Superior Court has the exclusive jurisdiction under the APA to hear complaints about the lawfulness of DENREC's regulations. And at such time that DENREC's regulations become final, the Public Advocate and Caesar Rodney should have their issues in the Superior Court under 29 Del Code 10141. Denrick also believes that amending the PSC's regulations at this time isn't necessary, that the regulations as they are fine. They clearly provide the process for imposing a freeze, including the duration of the freeze and lifting the freeze. We disagree with the public advocate and Cesar Rodney's claims that the PSC is abdicating its authority to Denrick by not promulgating regulations that specify how Denrick should calculate the total cost of complying with the renewable energy mandates. So we disagree with their interpretation of the statute. We feel this is an issue of substance, not process. The Denrick is not regulating the procedures for deciding whether to freeze the RPS. The Denrick is regulating how it will do its statutory duty, which is to calculate the total cost of compliance, a task that the General Assembly specifically designated to Denrick, not to the Commission. And as we cited in our motion, Superior Court has opined on this, that when the legislature grants a specific function to an administrative agency, which we believe that 354I and J give to Denrick, the discretion to determine whether to, in consultation with the Commission, whether to impose a freeze on those requirements. And then another agency may not adopt regulations that are inconsistent or conflict with that function. And we feel that if the Commission were to amend its regulations to, as Mr. Stevenson said, do that calculation or tell Denrick how to do that calculation, then it would be conflicting with Denrick's statutory function of doing that calculation.
But it says in consultation with the Commission, though, doesn't it? The State
Yes.
Energy Coordinator? So what's that mean?
The statute says that Denrick will determine that the total cost of complying with the requirement during a compliance year exceeds 1% or 3%. Sorry, let me just, in consultation. So that the Energy Coordinator, in consultation with the Commission, may freeze those requirements. And Denrick would foresee that they do sort of the legwork in doing that calculation, presenting it to the Commission, and consult with the Commission about whether a freeze is appropriate.
Would we issue an order saying that it is appropriate, or what would we do?
Well, that, I believe, would be more process than substance, of how the freeze would actually then be implemented. But doing the actual calculation...
That process isn't in our administrative code, though. I mean, we just talked about it. I don't think that process is mentioned in our regulation.
And the Commission, under the statute, doesn't have the authority to actually implement the freeze. The Department does. The Department must consult with the Commission, but the statute does not require that the Commission approve the freeze. So we would foresee that, and that would come to the Commission, explain why, and it's going to do what it's going to do. But we don't believe that the Commission should amend its regulations, as Mr. Stevenson indicated, to tell Denrick how to do that calculation. Because in that sense, what it would boil down to, that Denrick's discretion, its authority under the statute would be taken away, and that Denrick's role would be reduced to doing a math exercise, and that its statutory role would then become a non-discretionary ministerial act, which is not how we see this role, the statutory role. Denrick requests that the PSC deny the public advocate and Cesar Rodney's petition to open a docket at this time for the purpose of amending its regulations. public advocate and Cesar Rodney's complaints about DENREC's proposed regulations are not properly before this commission. Not only are their complaints premature, but when those issues are right, the Superior Court has the jurisdiction to decide if DENREC's regulations are lawful.
Thank you, Ms. Scott. Any questions, commissioners? Is that the letter from legislature?
Yeah,
It's in the record.
yeah.
You have a question you want to ask about? Okay, I'm afraid to ask that question, Mr. Stevenson. How about just 1 or 2 minutes for Ms. Iori and for Mr. Stevenson and rebuttal? And then we'll call it a quit right. We're going to quit it right there.
I do have a very brief response to Ms. Scott's argument. She says that we are seeking an advisory opinion as to what the authority is. We are not. We are asking the PSC to determine its authority, and it is well known that a board can examine the statutes that give it authority or that are within its bailiwick to determine whether or not they have the authority to do or not do something. Ms. Scott said that the regulations that the commission adopted in 2011 specify the length of a freeze. They do not. Again, there is nothing in there that is different than what the statute provides. And finally, Ms. Scott said that the state energy coordinator does have to coordinate with, or consult with the commission to freeze the minimum cumulative solar photovoltaics or the eligible energy resource requirements, but that it doesn't have to take what the commission says has an account. Essentially, the commission would be a rubber stamp. I'm not sure that that is what the legislation had in mind, but that actually is beyond the scope of the proceeding here, which is only asking the commission to determine what its authority is under the statute, and if it determines that it has the authority to promulgate procedures for freezing the minimum cumulative eligible energy resource and solar voltaic requirements, to reopen Reg 56 to do that. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Iori. Mr. Stevenson?
Yeah, basically, I think Ms. Scott has said that the PSC basically has no role in this. And clearly, the legislation says it's supposed to be in consultation. I can assure Ms. Scott that the portion of the regulation that is appropriate to DENREC on saying exactly what they're going to take into consideration if they suggest a freeze be waived, that part of the procedure we have and will continue to make public comments. There is the Environmental Appeals Board, which we will take advantage of. We will certainly consider going to the Superior Court if that's where it comes to. We will take, that is appropriate. This, however, has nothing to do with what DENREC's role is, which is, why they can waive. This is simply a matter of how you do the calculation. All we're looking for is an honest and timely calculation to protect the ratepayers as was described in the legislation, both in the intent and in the actual words of the statute.
Thank you, Mr. Stevenson. And that concludes the argument. Thanks to Ms. Scott.
I just wanted to make one point. Mr. Stevenson said that DENREC doesn't believe that the PSC has no role. That is not DENREC's position. DENREC's position is that it has the role of determining the total cost of complying with the requirement, and then in consultation with the commission, those requirements may be frozen. But if I may, Commissioners, Mr. Noyes would like to make a comment, if that's appropriate.
You're going to call him as a witness? Go ahead. You're doing this in rebuttal?
With all due respect, Chair Winslow, this is a legal argument. What does
I
the
can go with
statute?
you. I don't know what she's going to call him for.
Well, Mr. Noyes isn't a lawyer, so I don't think he's going to be able to tell you what the legal argument is.
I think I have to agree with Ms. Ivory. We're finished. This is it. It's all on the record. Let's make a decision. you know,
May I?
Yeah, sure.
Ask one question of Denrick
Absolutely.
before they retire? The latest total cost determination was done when?
I don't have that information. Mr. Noyes is on the front lines of.
All right, one last question. The last consultation with the Public Service Commission regarding this topic was when?
Again, Mr. Noyes would be able to answer that question.
Okay, thank you.
Questions. First of all,
Well, I don't think anybody has asked you the question, though, Mr. Noyes. Thank you very much, though. You know, I think I've expressed some of my personal frustration on this whole issue, and frankly, I'm really happy that we're here. Probably a lot of people weren't happy to see the motion, and I don't think I was ecstatic about it, but I've grown a little more fonder about the motion over time, and having heard your arguments. You know, it's frustrating because, you know, we got this letter from the legislature, and I wish they had been here today, because the statute, if it could speak, would be saying, fix me, fix me. But it can't speak. So I think that someone in this room, maybe myself and the commissioner, should make a suggestion in writing to the legislature with respect to perhaps some improvements to the language of the statute. I also think, in retrospect, that I didn't do such a good job. I think staff and everyone, with respect to what we did, considering what the statute says, I mean, I'm not sure what else we could have done. But I mean, it just seems to me, after some thought, that it could be improved upon. But what the petitioners are asking for is that to issue regulations governing when a freeze of the minimum percentages of eligible energy resources in solar photovoltaics may be declared pursuant, et cetera. And, you know, I think that the clear statutory language gives that primarily responsibility to the state energy coordinator in both I and J. We have had a previous regulatory meeting, and the previous order, as Ms. Mayrack has said. So I want to come down on the side of the DENREC and the staff with respect to this particular issue, but I do hope, if we in fact vote in that fashion, that the parties together here make some entree to the legislature to try to make things a little bit more focused and clear as to where we're going in the future, because we haven't been anywhere in the past so far, it sounds like to me. And this issue of how we're going to accomplish what's in the statute is not going to be accomplished unless the statute, I don't think, unless the statute's going to be amended and give us more direction. So that's my feelings. Anybody else want to talk about theirs? I move that, as I spoke, I move that we approve, accept the position of DENREC and staff with respect to the motion of CRI and the public advocate.
I'll second that.
Is there any discussion on the motion as stated? Hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? One abstention? And none opposed. It passes 3-1. 1 abstention.
Point of clarification, Chair Winslow. Staff and DENREC had submitted a form of order with their motion, but the form of order that they submitted, given the discussion that went on, does not track the discussion that went on. So will a separate order be forthcoming?
I think that's a very good suggestion. I'd like to see another order that perhaps incorporates a little bit more into it. We'll look at that December 3rd. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair Winslow and Commissioners.
I expect that obviously you'll get some input into that. Okay, where's my agenda? Okay, if Delaware Power is still here, we got the approval of the 216 program for procurement of solar. So, Mr. Goodman, you're next, and please have a seat. 8808. Mr. Goodman.
I have some comments on the last thing. You never called.
Mr. Goodman, 8808.
Anyway, yes, Your Honor, I have received, as usual, the draft of the memorandum from your staff, and we agree 100% with their position that should be opened under the order that they've drafted and provided to you. So I'll make this quick and clean. I'm done.
Thank you very much, Mr. Goodman.
Mr. Chairman, as Mr. Goodman has noted, we have draft order 8808 in docket number 15-1472 before the commission. This opens a docket and sets up a process to consider the renewable energy credits and solar renewable energy credits. This process is expedited at the company's request, but still affords all public notice and comment opportunities as required by statute to ensure that this process is in place, I believe, by June 1st of next year. So staff would urge the commission to adopt this order.
Thank you, Ms. Mayor. Ms. Iori?
Thank you, Chair Winslow. This may be a function of early senility, but I don't remember seeing this order. If it was sent to me, I apologize, but because I don't recall having seen it, I don't have any comments on it.
Any commissioners have any questions on the proposed order? May we have a motion, please, to approve it?
I move that we adopt the order number 8808 as submitted.
I second it.
Is there any discussion on the approval of proposed order 8808? Hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? 4-0, it's approved. Thank you, Mr. Goodman.
Thank you.
We're going to take about a 60-second in-place break while we have the matter of the commission's investigation into whether Mr. Timmons is unlawfully operating a utility. Is Mr. Timmons present? Anybody here representing Mr. Timmons? Please feel free to come forward, Mr. Timmons. No, he's not here.
No.
Mr. Timmons is not apparently present. So we have, is Ms. Iori going to be here for this? Okay.
65 seconds. Sorry, 68 seconds.
Thank you.
I don't think anybody really missed her.
That was
She
bad.
was so quiet today.
That was bad.
Be very quiet when Commissioner Gray returns. Joe, this is you,
Years
right?
of training.
Okay, Ms. Donahue, would you please proceed?
Yes, good afternoon, Chair and Commissioners. You have before you proposed order number 8812. This is involving an investigation docket that has a company and possibly more than one individual that may be providing water services without a CPCN issued by this commission. The impetus of this docket was that staff received some consumer complaints from residents in the Holiday Pines development and staff began receiving these complaints as early as January of 2014. Because of the onset, staff wasn't able to get responses from the company when they first started getting the consumer complaints. And they did try to contact the company several times. Because they weren't able to get the responses that they needed and the information that they needed to resolve the consumer complaints, they presented to you the opening order for this matter. And you signed that order and we proceeded on that. And after that, as staff began investigating more, staff concluded that there might be an evidentiary hearing needed for this matter. So we presented another order to you in which we recommended that you appoint a hearing examiner, but delay any decision by the hearing examiner until I believe it was a date in June of 2015, which would give the parties time to see if they could come to a settled conclusion of the issues involved in this docket. And then after this hearing examiner was appointed, staff, the DPA, which is also a party, and Tidewater, which is also a party that was granted intervention, have been able to hold meetings and discussions that have been productive. They've also involved DENREC, the Department of Health, the Office of Drinking Water, and the U.S. Department of Agricultural Rural Development. Now, all of these parties have been cooperating, including the Timmons, in trying to get a focused and practical resolution of the problem, which are that these consumers are receiving water services from an unlicensed company or individual. During these meetings and discussions, staff has come to the conclusion that it might be possible to get a resolution without the need for any evidentiary hearing. And again, the focus is trying to solve the problem that the consumers have. We understand, our staff understands that more work is still needed throughout this process, but the focus remains on trying to get a resolution that works here. And that is why in this process, we are now recommending that the commission hear this matter directly. That if there is a resolution, which we believe can be reached between the parties, that we would hold an evidentiary hearing in front of this commission rather than hold it in front of a hearing examiner. Now, I understand, and I've received a copy of an ex parte communication that was sent to all of the commissioners and the chair.
May I just speak to that?
Yes.
I received that communications and did not open it up and did not read it. I believe that some other commissioners may have read it. They're hereby informed and told that that is not evidence in this matter and they're not to consider that in making a judgment on this matter.
Point of clarification, I have two memoranda of sorts. Can you identify which one should not be?
May I see it, please?
This is the one that...
This is the one right there.
Yeah.
I haven't read it, but I know the author.
Yeah, I guess I should have identified that the communication was
No, you
from...
don't need to do that.
Yeah, okay, good. All right. For those of you who have read it, I would discourage you from relying on any of the statements made in it. I assure you that the statements made are not accurate facts. And some of the statements may be based on self-directed discovery conducted on this person's own direction, certainly not of staff's and certainly not of this commission. I also want to assure you that to the best of my knowledge, the currently appointed hearing examiner has not engaged in such conduct and has not engaged in any inappropriate fact-finding discovery that may have occurred with another member of staff. I also want to again emphasize that staff's goal here is to reach an agreed upon settlement and a resolution of the issues in this docket, and therefore we believe that we can accomplish this goal in a timely manner in presenting this to the commission directly, and we will continue to keep the commission updated as to the important facts that will be needed in order to resolve the issues in this docket. Now, I have with me both Ms. Connie McDowell and Mr. Kevin Nielsen, who are available for any questions regarding the progress of this, although I would hesitate for them to go into more specifics about any kind of fact-finding unless you want them sworn in. But they are here to also confirm as far as the resolution that may be possible and also what's been done to date.
Thank you, Ms. Donahue. Mr. Bodor or Ms. Iori?
Thank you, Chair Winslow. The public advocate supports the proposed form of order. We do not think that any good will be served by rushing this to what may wind up to be an unnecessary evidentiary hearing before a hearing examiner. I think this is one of those instances in which government should get out of the way and let the parties figure out how best to resolve this issue. And so the public advocate 100% supports staff's proposed order.
Thank you, Ms. Iori. Is there anyone here from the community that wishes to be heard? No one is responding. Any commissioners have any questions of
Yes,
the parties?
I do.
Commissioner Conaway.
Ms. Donahue, would you please identify the hearing examiner on this case?
The one that the commissioners have appointed is R. Campbell Hay.
That's what I thought. Yeah.
The commission has not done any other action or orders that have yet changed or removed Campbell Hay as the hearing examiner.
Okay, thank you.
It seems to me that the argument is that it would be more efficient and less work and no adverse inference at all with respect to whoever the hearing examiner is. It's just a more efficient way of doing business in this particular circumstance. So I'll support staff's motion.
I will then, do you have a question?
Go ahead.
Move that we adopt order number 8812.
I'll second it.
Commissioner Gray.
Just a short discussion. So the residents who are receiving water from someone who doesn't yet have a CPCN, what is the risk to them, and for what duration of time do you anticipate this risk will prevail?
Sorry, I look like I'm confused. One of them's going to jump in and answer that for you.
I can't give you a direct answer on how long it's going to take. It's going to take a while because there's a lot of process that we have to go through. We have a couple possible solutions, and it's just going to take time to get through those.
Does that sound or feel like months, years, decades?
It's going to be probably months, definitely. Again, it's not an easy process, but to go forward with a hearing is not going to get us to where they have a system any quicker than what we're going to do this way. In fact, it may not come as quickly. It probably will not. The risk to the customers right at this point, my understanding, I've talked to. I don't want to get into too much of the details. I guess this. So I'll try to limit that. But health department is monitoring the water quality, and my understanding is there's no problem with that at this point. And we really have not received a lot of complaints of any kind of quality or issues like that. Initially, the call that I got originally with this was a person that called to ask if explain what the system was that he understood down there, and ask if it was a legitimate company. And that's how the commission got involved with it. We learned that there was a system that was operating that may be under the jurisdiction, should be under the jurisdiction of the commission.
Okay, but the health department is monitoring on behalf of the consumers.
Yes,
That's correct. No further questions.
Thank you, Commissioner Gray. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstention? The motion passes 4-0. On the hearing schedule, there is none today. Is there anyone here from the public that wishes to make comment to the Public Service Commission? Mr. Howard, it's your turn.
Chairman Winslow, Commissioners, I appreciate the opportunity to address you with extremely short number of comments today.
Thank you.
Our next commission meeting will be held on Tuesday, November the 24th. We'll probably have a few turkeys around for that day as well, just to get in place for our Thanksgiving holiday. But we will also have at that meeting an evidentiary hearing being held by Delmarva Power on their environmental surcharge rider, and that will also occur at that meeting. So we look forward to that, and I'm sure a lot of other agenda items before Thanksgiving holiday. Thank you.
Thanks, Mr. Howard. The commission meeting is adjourned. Thank you all very much.